Hiring someone to make outbound calls to prospects is one of the smartest things that you can do because they can build relationships on the phone and identify which people are nearly ready to switch MSP. But they're some of the hardest people to hire, manage, and motivate. We're going to look at why outsourcing calls is probably not the answer, who to hire instead, and how to get them booking appointments on the phone. Hey, I'm Paul Green, and don't forget, for all the content, tools, and training to market and grow your MSP, check out mspmarketingedge.com. Today's big interview is with an MSP owner who knows how to make successful outbound sales calls.
Hi, I'm Jon Wright from Core Managed, and we're headquartered in Indianapolis, Indiana.
And thank you for joining me on the podcast, Jon. It's always great to get another MSP on. And you have a specific thing that you are going to talk about today, which is hiring a sales development representative. We're going to use the acronym. We're going to use SDR throughout this, but basically someone who picks up the phone, makes outbound phone calls, and tries to get leads for you. And I know that you've been particularly successful with this, and yet many other MSPs struggle, which is why we're going to explore today what you've done, how you've done it, and how other MSPs can model the work that you've done getting these people in. Let's first of all tell a little bit about your story. So how long have you been running your MSP? How did you get started?
So we started the company 13 years ago, and we've been growing organically since then from 2 to 30 people with no acquisitions or anything like that. How I got started is kind of a long story, but basically I decided, even though I'm not a trained technician, I decided that this is what I would love to do. And so I decided to do what I love. And that's why we had 2 people on day one and not just one, like a lot of our peers, because I hired a tech on the first day. And the rest is history.
Yeah. So what was it that drove you to hire that tech, before you'd even got an income coming in for yourself?
It's because I didn't know how to do IT work.
Oh, right.
No, in all seriousness, I can still close 8 out of 10 tickets that come into the help desk. Good critical thinking and just general common sense. But early on, I wanted to focus on the business. So.
Yeah. So you were coming into this knowing that you just didn't want it to be just you and a couple of other people for 15 years. You wanted to actually go at it and grow it into something. So what was the point at which you realized that you needed to, well, actually, before we get to that question, talk us through what you were doing to grow the business organically before you hired salespeople. So, what were the marketing methods that worked best for you in the first few years?
Well, like a lot of people, with us so small and with me being so involved in the business, I didn't have to do much. We just did really good work. We got referrals. We exhausted our warm relationships, like our neighbors, friends, family, church members, people we used to work with. And it just came very, very easy. Also, during the break fix era, we were taking any work that came along. And so that also made it seem easy, although it didn't build the kind of company we were trying to build. It was just referral based. And it wasn't until we kind of hit a wall that we started looking into more different methods, and especially methods that we thought might scale.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And the wall that you hit, did that coincide with a transition over to managed services, or were those two things completely separate?
I would say it's possible that was there. It was also as we built out some systems that I wasn't as involved. So we weren't getting referrals from people because they didn't know me, and no one else was asking for referrals. And not to mention that we probably had just penetrated the best warm referrals in our circle of influence. And so, I think that it did partially coincide with going fully managed, because when we went fully managed, we started saying no to a ton of work. And so that made leads that much more valuable.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So a lot of MSPs get to this position and they struggle. They don't quite know what to do. It's all the fun referrals have, as you say, have dried up. And what seemed easy and seemed like it would never end, of business just turning up at the door, that actually ends. And many of them don't know what to do. Some of them start to go out networking, and I mean going to events. Others of them start doing pay-per-click or search engine optimization. or just, flounder around. And it's a really common thing. And many people listening to this or watching this right now will have been or will indeed still be in that situation. So as your leads started to dry up, did you go straight to the route of hiring someone to do the sales calls for you, or what did you do next?
If I recall, we probably thought that pay-per-click was the answer. So we dove pretty hard into pay-per-click and tried to figure that out and failed. So, and that's when we kind of went the other way.
So talk us through, I think you were telling me just before our interview that the very first thing you did was you actually hired an outside vendor to do these sales calls for you.
Yeah, so we hired, now that I think about it, we hired two. So the first vendor we hired was fully outsourced. So the caller worked for them. They fractionalized that caller to about 3 or 4 different MSPs, or maybe even 3 or 4 different businesses. So we had what was essentially a third of a caller. Met him in person. He drove to Indianapolis. We had lunch. We put him on our website. He changed his LinkedIn profile to say he worked here. So it was trying to put forth a real professional image. He worked really hard. We made a couple of sales, but ultimately I decided that the quality wasn't there. So we parted ways with that vendor. We parted ways friends. Took a little break and found another vendor who has a little different business model where they hire your person for you. So they recruit and train and manage a person that is your employee in your building if you want them to be. So they found us our first SDR in Indianapolis. She works in our office and is a W-2 employee, W-2 being maybe a uniquely United States term, but not a contractor.
Yeah.
And they managed her for a year. Weekly meetings, regular huddles, performance reviews, and everything. And I think they did a fantastic job, and that was what got me inspired to figure this out. So I wanted to be able to do this 10 times. And I said, well, if I'm ever going to have 10 SDRs, then I'm going to eventually part ways with this vendor and master this sales management piece in-house. And so we did. We ended that engagement and we went to hire our second SDR on our own.
The irony for that company that they did such a good job that you then ended you ended your engagement with them and went off to do it yourself. But I think you were right. It's the only way you can possibly scale up. You look at if you want to get 5 or 10 of these people working for you, you can't do that through an agency. You've got to have that skill set in house. So what was your experience? Having so you it sounds. I have to say, Jon, you've had a uniquely pleasant experience with 2 vendors. So I know the first one didn't quite work out quality-wise, but you still got some sales from it, and it did work out the second time. And we could have 1,000 other MSPs on this show who have also used these kind of agencies, and they've not had a good experience. Perhaps things have started well, and then the quality really dropped off, or actually they feel like they've spent tens of thousands of dollars and never quite got anything in return. So bravo to you for actually getting that return. Talk us through what it was like actually going out and hiring your own SDR.
So the second SDR we hired, we kind of happened upon a woman in the Philippines. We weren't seeking to offshore this role, but it looked perfect. It was a referral, and from somebody we knew. She had worked for a large distributor, making lots of phone calls, because I think the hardest part of recruiting this person is finding somebody who's willing to bang the phones for 70, 80, 90 calls a day. So that's the first hurdle to clear. And so we hired her. We used a website that helps make that easy from a legal standpoint. And we hired her full-time 40 hours a week. And we did our best to manage her. But I think we did a real poor job. And we definitely learned some lessons there. But ultimately what we learned was she wasn't at all doing her job, and we didn't know. And that sucked because it took us several months to understand that we weren't tracking things properly, the right KPIs and listening to recordings and the like. So for better, for worse, again, now we're 1 for 2. So I'm not really complaining because number one is done so fantastically. Of course, I'm a little disappointed because we haven't proven that we can do it. And so we went to look for number 3. And number 3 is 6 months in, and it's going really well. So we may have learned the lessons that we need to learn.
So I've got 2 follow-up questions to that. One is about the qualities you look for in the person, and then I'm going to ask you what those KPIs are, so how you manage and track their performance. So when you were going looking for number 3, what kind of person works well for this? Because as you say, this is a tough gig to pick up the phone and make 80, 90 outbound calls a day. That's not pleasant work for some people. I wouldn't want to do it, and I'm guessing that, Jon, you wouldn't want to do it either. So what kind of qualities do you look for in the people that you're hiring?
Well, I'm going to say something that's probably not the same as what a lot of my peers would say. I see a lot of my peers looking for that, somebody re-entering the workforce after devoting their time to their family, or somebody who they just see a little something in them. I think that's a real long shot. I think you need to look for somebody who's already done it, and you need to be willing to pay them. Those are 2 mistakes that I think our peers are making, is cheaping out on the salary, looking for somebody who will do it on commission only. And, my advice to my peers would be to be willing to take a big risk and paying somebody what they're worth, who's already demonstrated their worth. That's what we did. Yeah. So I think that answers your question. Like how do I know that they're willing and capable? Because they've done it. Now, of course, the hard part is, why are they looking? But that's with any role you hire. If they're so great, then why are they moving on from their current employer?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So, how are you tracking them now? And actually, tell us: are these 2 people remote, or are they both sat in your office?
They are both local. And the reason I wanted to hire local when you could hire anywhere in the world is I want the possibility that they might develop into an outside salesperson, the type of person who gives presentations in person, shakes hand. That's our sales cycle, our sales process. So we hired local. They probably are 50-50 between their desk and their home office. And at their desk, they have a private office with a door they can shut because they're working amongst IT people. And so we got to have that privacy.
Yeah, absolutely. And it can get noisy sometimes, can't it? And actually, they've got to be very focused on what's going on the phone rather than what's going on in the office. So what KPIs are you tracking with your 2 people right now?
So first, there's the number of phone calls. So I'll tell you how we do this. We do this with HubSpot. We do this by making all of our phone calls through HubSpot, which was a technical challenge that, again, a lot of our peers are going to want to solve a variety of different ways. We solved it the expensive way, perhaps, but we get great reporting. Through HubSpot, we get transcriptions and recordings and metrics right there in the CRM. And so we know number of calls, that's the first one, and then we know average duration. And so I think the duration needs to be an average of 45 to 60 seconds. To kind of signal that the SDR is having quality conversations. So a real low average duration means they're probably not getting past the gatekeeper. So the higher the better, generally, on average call duration. And then it's number of discovery appointments. And a lot of times you do a follow-up email and invite the prospect to book with you. That's a discovery call. But a lot of times the discovery call happens on your first call. Or your first conversation, where I've lucked into Paul, who has a need now, is hot, and he's willing to talk to me. I can spend 8 to 12 minutes with him, making sure he's qualified. And so we're tracking the number of discovery calls or first-time appointments, which leads to an on-site technical assessment. And then that's the end of this SDR's responsibility for metrics and whether or not the deal closes, if they get us an in-person meeting.
Yeah, that makes sense. So just to check, the people that they're calling, are they just making cold calls to data that you've purchased, or are they making slightly warm calls to people that you know in some way?
They're almost all exclusively cold. we pay another vendor for very expensive data to try and make them more efficient. So yeah, they're almost all cold. A warm lead would be, one that maybe hit us up on the website. But, the way people shop these days, if they came to our website and they book an appointment, then you're bypassing the SDR, right? There's no need for a cold call at that point. That person is almost bought. And so that's why we kind of let them focus on the relationships that we have that are super cold.
Yeah, that makes sense. And presumably they are, if they speak to someone today and, they have a 2-3 minute engagement, but for whatever reason, it's just not the right time for that person, which I'm guessing is the vast majority of people you speak to. Do you then pop them back into HubSpot and sort of schedule them for a follow-up call 6 or 12 months down the line?
Yeah, absolutely. And even I myself, I'm responsible for closing the deals in Indianapolis, and I use HubSpot as if I would want a salesperson to use it. And every single day I have somewhere between 5 and 15 follow-up tasks that are just constantly rolling. So I'll just send that person an email and schedule a follow-up for 90 days or 6 months or 12 months, depending on how warm or cold they are.
Yeah, I love it. What I love about this is, and using HubSpot is the thing that's made this easy for you, is you've turned this into a system. So this isn't just some haphazard, we must remember to make some calls today. This has become a system where you've got two people in two different marketplaces that you work in, and they have a responsibility to make X number of dials. You're tracking it, you're measuring it. You mentioned earlier about listening back to calls, so I presume there's some kind of performance coaching going on with them, or at least just monitoring, now and again, dipping in and seeing what they're saying. So I absolutely love this. And the secret to this is definitely, I think, that you've systemized this. Because anytime you have any kind of marketing or sales system, it's something that happens on a regular basis. Let's finish off, Jon, with the two most common questions that I get. And I get a lot of questions about how to set these kind of SDRs up. The questions I'm going to finish on are how you keep this person motivated. And then the final question is how many dials you have to make in order to win a new client. And I'm just looking for an approximation for that. Let's deal with the motivation one first. As we've said a couple of times, this is not a fun job for many people. I know some people love it, but many people don't. So how do you keep your two SDRs motivated?
Well, we have twice daily meetings, first thing in the morning and then in the afternoon. And of course, meetings aren't good if you don't have the personality for motivating and encouraging people. So you need to be able to spend that time filling their cup, if you will, answering their questions, building their confidence, showing them the marketing materials that you've developed that will help equip them, just all of the things that kind of get them excited and keep them excited, celebrating their wins and things like that. So whether they're virtual, and actually our people have a desk in an office where none of our leadership team is. So this is almost always done via video conference. So it's regular calls and encouragement. And then, of course, it's with money, right? I mean, we hire people that are very money motivated. And so, again, that goes back to my earlier comment about hiring somebody who is wanting to do sales, not somebody who you saw doing marketing and you thought maybe they might be good at sales. So we start with somebody who wants to sell and is very money motivated. So we pay them fairly, and we pay them all. And this is another thing that I see a lot of people trying to do differently, and it's fine. We pay them all of their commission up front. There is no residual or trailing commission. We want them to get a really big check when we close a deal, and then we want them hungry again. Yeah.
And they only earn commission when you actually win a client. They don't earn commission just for booking appointments, which of course motivates them to book high quality appointments that are potentially going to turn into business.
Great question. It's a base salary plus a closed deal. So nothing in between is commissionable, which means they won't be setting garbage appointments.
Yeah, that makes sense. Final question then, Jon, and it is one of the hardest things, as I said earlier, for MSPs is, you're going to hire someone and they're going to pick up the phone on Monday morning and they could spend all week dialing and speaking to people and not generate an appointment for you. Do you, and I'm not going to ask your stats for every stage of the process, because I think actually that's something that will be unique to each MSP and it will be unique to geographically where you are and the kind of people you're calling and all of that. but approximately, do you know how many phone calls or how many days worth of phoning it takes from one of your SDRs for you to get a new client?
I'm going to go with 400 calls, 2 discovery appointments, 0.25 to 0.5 deals.
Okay.
So let's go 1,600 to 3,200 calls per deal. I think that extrapolates to.
Yeah, I'm not a figures guy, but that sounds about right to me.
Yeah.
So I think you can see from that, and here's someone who's been doing this for some time and is doing it successfully with 2 people. It is not a short game. It is not an easy and quick win. But as we were saying earlier, you've set up a great system here, and you've got a system now which is going to, for every 1,600 calls, is going to pump out some kind of new client. And obviously there's lots of detail along the way there, and lots of work. But actually, that's a great marketing system.
Those numbers are only going to work for you if you're charging enough and the lifetime value of your customer is very high. So if you're doing projects and hourly work, it would be almost impossible to justify that spend. So it only works if you can make sure you have a large lifetime value.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've got to have a look at that, not just that average lifetime value, I guess, of a new client, but in terms of the monthly revenue. So when do I get the cash back? If I've had to pay for 1,600 calls to be paid, I want to see, several $1,000s coming in or a couple of $1,000s a month coming in right from the start. And I guess each of these new clients, there's a number of months where actually you're not making any money from them. But the bigger picture, of course, as you say, is they're going to stay for 5 years or whatsoever. So do we get payback by month 3, by month 4, etc.? Yes, we do. And then we'll keep getting the payback for a number of years. Jon, you've been very generous sharing this process on the podcast. So thank you so much for that. Just tell us, what's the best way for other MSPs who want to have a chat with you? What's the best way for them to get in touch?
Yeah, just connect with me on LinkedIn. I think that would be great.
Paul Green's MSP Marketing Edge.